You ever notice how people ignore the whispers until the scream finally comes? That's the way it works. Quiet nudges, little signs, strange coincidences, and everyone just shrugs it off, pretending it's nothing. But then one day, the message doesn't arrive as a whisper. It comes like a siren, a warning, a demand, an order. And suddenly, it's not optional anymore. It's not something you can put off until tomorrow. It's an emergency, the kind you can't run from, the kind that drags you by the throat and forces your eyes open. Whispers turn into urgent screams when ignored. At first, it's nothing but a nudge, a small misstep, a strange coincidence, a late night thought you shove back under the pillow because it's easier to sleep than to listen. People collect those nudges like trinkets and call them superstition. They fold the warnings into the same drawer as fear and promise themselves they'll open it another day. But those small noises keep piling up. They don't vanish. They sharpen. They gather volume. They start to form a pattern. And if you're the kind of fool who pays attention, you can feel the pattern like a pulse under your ribs, counting down to a moment when whispers become a siren. The world has a way of letting you pretend you're safe until the last possible second. It arranges distractions, hands out comforts, fills your calendar with things that feel urgent, but mean nothing. That's the trick. Keep them occupied until the real alarm finally has to shout. And people love being occupied. They'll trade truth for the comfortable lie that the present will always be the same. They'll laugh at the first crack in the wall. They'll decorate the house with curtains and candles while the foundation quietly gives way. The whisper that begged for attention is mocked, pushed aside, wrapped in denial, until denial can't hold it back anymore, and the whisper rips open like an alarm bell. When it finally becomes a scream, there's nowhere to hide. The sound doesn't plead anymore, it accuses. It pulls the curtains back with hands that don't give a damn about your excuses. Suddenly, you notice the fissures in things you loved, the stains on promises everybody pretended were permanent, the hollow heartbeat of systems people swore were forever. The scream is not polite. It does not wait for your permission to enter. It demands action. And the cruelest truth is that action costs far more than the small, sensible preparations you could have made when the whisper still sounded like curiosity. Most people freeze in that second. They clutch their routines like life preservers and hope the water will recede. They want proof, signatures, guarantees, the next form to fill in before they can move. They ask for time, for authority, for someone else to step forward first. But emergencies don't negotiate. A scream doesn't accept petitions or polite emails. It requires a body in motion right now, a hand to pull a lever, an eye to read the charred label before the room fills with smoke. Hesitation becomes a chain. And when the scream becomes the only language left, all the hours spent ignoring the whisper look like complicity. The funny thing is the whisper was never the enemy. Your refusal to listen was. Warnings arrive gentle because mercy prefers subtlety at first. It gives you space to choose. But human stubbornness, habit, pride, They turn mercy into mockery by ignoring it until mercy must shout. When that happens, mercy and judgment wear the same voice. The choice you missed becomes a command you can't avoid, and suddenly your excuses are as flimsy as paper in a fire. The irony sits there, smoking. You were offered the chance to prepare, and instead you chose the moment of panic that now punishes you. And here's the brutal slice. The scream doesn't care who deserved it. It comes whether you were noble or coward, whether you warned others or warned nobody at all. It comes because the moment arrived. Cause and consequence are indifferent to reputation. Some people will run and call it fate. Some will stand and call it destiny. Most will clutch whatever is left of their dignity and try to bargain with reality, as if shouting louder could stitch the past back together. But bargains with the scream are empty trades. It takes more than bargaining to fix what you let rot in silence. So when the whisper starts, when that small doubt nudges you awake, don't be one of the ones who plants their head back under the pillow. Don't be the crowd that laughs at the messenger until the messenger turns into a prophet, only because the roof has already caved. Listen while it's still low and soft. Act while you can still buy time with a small choice, a small sacrifice, a small inconvenience you pretend you hate. Because once whispers become screams, the luxury of time is gone, and the only currency left is the kind you can spend with your hands right now. Not the kind you wish you'd saved up yesterday when you had the chance to hear. Emergencies leave no room for delay. That's the part people hate the most. The way it rips choice out of their hands. You see, everyone loves the idea of control. They like to think they're running their own schedules, balancing their priorities, deciding what can wait until tomorrow. It's a sweet little illusion, isn't it? But an emergency doesn't ask for permission to arrive. It crashes the door, flips the table, and suddenly all those neat little plans you built are worth less than ashes. The moment demands attention, and it doesn't matter if you're ready or not. The funny thing is, you've seen this play out in small ways 1,000 times. The alarm clock you ignored because 5 more minutes felt harmless. The message you promised to answer later that turned into a missed opportunity. The small repairs you delayed because they didn't look urgent until the whole system broke down. That's how it always works. Delay feels safe until the cost of it arrives like a knife at your throat. Emergencies are just delayed consequences, stacked high enough that they can't be ignored anymore. They don't burst out of nowhere. They're built brick by brick out of your own postponements. And when the emergency finally explodes into view, what do people do? They hesitate. They look for a committee to form, a procedure to follow, a voice of authority to sign the paper, so they won't have to carry the blame. They think waiting will make the fire smaller, when in reality it just feeds it. By the time they act, the damage is already doubled. Delay becomes its own executioner, and yet most people cling to it like a blanket. Why? Because delay feels comfortable. Even when it's lethal, you can watch the panic in their eyes when they realize the window has slammed shut. The second of hesitation becomes a prison. The fire grows, the clock ticks, and suddenly the luxury of waiting has vanished. Emergencies don't care about your feelings, your schedule, or your fear. They care about action. And the cruelest truth is that action in an emergency always costs more than it would have if you had moved when the whisper first came. The longer you wait, the higher the price. That's the law. That's the rhythm. Most people beg for another chance. They say, "Just give me a little more time. I'll fix it, I swear." But time is not a negotiator in emergencies. It's the executioner. The more you try to negotiate, the more you tighten the noose. Emergencies don't trade, they take. They strip away the luxury of choice, and what's left is either survival or collapse. The faster you move, the slimmer the cost. The slower you move, the deeper the grave. It's always that simple. But look closely at the few who respond differently. When the alarm blares, they don't freeze. They don't ask for permission. They move. They know hesitation is the real killer. They've learned that emergencies don't give gold medals for being careful. They hand out scars to the ones who were too slow. These people aren't fearless. Fear runs through their veins like everyone else, but they've seen enough to know that action is the only antidote to panic. They don't wait for someone else to solve it. They solve it, or they die trying. That's what sets them apart. And here's the part most can't swallow. Sometimes the emergency is the test. Not a random accident, not a cruel trick, but the exact moment designed to strip away excuses and see what you are when all the masks are gone. Will you still stall? Still bargain? Still pray for a tomorrow that may never arrive? Or will you step forward when the fire demands it? That's the question that emergencies ask, and they never wait for you to answer politely. They drag the truth out of you in real time, exposing every weakness, every cowardice, every hesitation you thought you could hide. So when it hits, when the door bursts open and the alarm slices the air, you don't get to play the old games anymore. You don't get to shuffle papers or make promises or dream about later. Emergencies don't care about later. They care about now. And the ones who move now, no matter how messy, no matter how imperfect, no matter how reckless it looks, they're the only ones who come out the other side with something left to salvage. Everyone else gets buried under the rubble of their own delay. Most freeze, but the call isn't for them. That's the truth that rattles inside the bones of every so-called chosen one. You see it in crowds all the time. Something happens, something urgent, and people stop. They freeze like statues carved out of fear. Eyes wide, breath caught, heart pounding so loud it drowns out thought. They're not built for motion when chaos shows its teeth. They're built to watch, to wait, to hope someone else takes the step they're too terrified to make. That's why the call isn't for them. When the signal comes, it doesn't echo for the crowd. It threads its way into the skull of the one person who can't ignore it. Everyone else hears noise, but you hear a command. You feel it crawl under your skin, burn through your chest, rip the excuses out of your throat. That's why others stand still while you move. They don't understand it because it was never meant for them. They're background placeholders, shadows filling the room. And shadows don't answer destiny. Only the one carrying the fire does. It's almost cruel when you think about it. Why should it be you? Why should the burden be placed on your shoulders while everyone else gets to hide in silence, pretending it was never their job? But that's how it works. The call doesn't land on the comfortable. It skips the ones who'd waste it. It hunts for the one with scars deep enough to prove they can take the weight. That's the joke people don't see. The call doesn't pick the lucky. It picks the broken. Because the broken know how to keep moving when everyone else is paralyzed. Watch closely the next time disaster strikes. The majority will scatter or stand still, choking on their own hesitation. They'll ask for leaders, for rules, for someone to tell them what to do. But if you wait for someone else, you'll be waiting forever. Emergencies don't crown leaders, they reveal them. And if you're the one who feels that pounding in your skull, the weight of the voice that says, now, then congratulations. The room is yours, whether you wanted it or not. You can step forward, or you can choke on the same paralysis as the rest. The cruelest part is the loneliness of it. Nobody else will understand why you moved. They'll call it reckless, insane, dangerous. They'll whisper behind your back because your speed makes their hesitation look like cowardice. But that's exactly what it is. And deep down, they know it. That's why they despise you. Why they drag your name through the dirt. It's easier to smear the one who acted than to admit they failed to. So they turn their fear into jealousy and their jealousy into poison. But still, you act. Because the call isn't theirs to answer, and the weight isn't theirs to carry. This is where the fracture happens. The divide between the one chosen and the many who aren't. It's not about strength or knowledge or even preparation. It's about wiring. Some are wired to sit. Some are wired to watch. And a very small, cursed fraction are wired to respond, even when the odds are impossible. That fraction doesn't get applause, not at first. They get resistance, suspicion, hostility. Because moving when everyone else freezes doesn't just save the moment, it exposes the truth that most people never intended to rise at all. And here's the darkest irony. The frozen will always outnumber the few who move, but history never remembers the frozen. Their names dissolve in the crowd. Their faces blend into the blur of inaction. The only ones who leave a mark are the ones who broke free of paralysis. The ones who heard the call and treated it as if it were life itself. And that's because it was. Not for everyone, not for the crowd, but for the one who could feel the urgency like a brand pressed against the skin. So when you feel that weight, when you hear that voice, when you recognize the call threading through the chaos, understand this. It was never designed for the people beside you. It was never going to move the crowd. It was always going to fall into your lap, sharp and burning, because you're the one who can't afford to freeze. The emergency doesn't care about numbers. doesn't care about popularity, doesn't care about fairness. It only cares about the one who moves when everyone else becomes stone. And if that's you, then hesitation is death, because the call was only ever meant for your ears. Higher orders demand immediate obedience. It isn't a polite suggestion tossed across the table like a napkin. It's an incision that needs to be made before infection spreads. When something greater than you speaks, it doesn't wait for your schedule or your excuses. It doesn't ask whether you've had your coffee, whether you've checked your messages, whether the committee approves. It drops the hammer and expects a hand to move, not a meeting to be scheduled. People act surprised by that truth because they're trained to treat life like a calendar. Appointments, postponements, polite delays. But orders that come stamped with a force beyond your control aren't interested in courtesy. They're interested in obedience, and obedience is immediate. There's a pressure to it that tastes like iron. It presses on your chest and makes indecision a luxury you can't afford. You can practice courage in theory, rehearse bravery in safe rooms with soft lighting. But the moment a higher command cuts through the noise, rehearsals die on the spot. The voice that demands immediate action doesn't care for your rehearsed lines. It wants your body where it needs to be now. That's the cruelty and the clarity of it. The universe doesn't respect your timetable. It will force your hand, or it will break your world. And people who think they can bargain with that are always the ones left bargaining for their lives. Obedience in those moments is not obedience for show. It's not the kind that smiles for cameras or signs glossy documents. It's the kind that drags you out of bed in the middle of the night, that pulls you away from the warm safety of denial, that forces you to choose between comfort and consequence. There's a shame in admitting you were asleep when the siren sounded, a deeper shame in realizing you thought the alarm was someone else's problem. The higher order doesn't ask whether you felt called. It only asks whether you answered. And if you didn't, the wreckage doesn't care how good your reasons sounded in the daylight. Most people are allergic to the idea of immediate obedience because it removes excuses. It takes away the armor of procrastination, strips you of the moral wiggle room you use to sleep at night. If you must act now, then you must admit you were capable earlier and chose not to. That admission is poisonous to pride. So the masses invent delays, summon committees, create rituals of denial. But the order doesn't negotiate. The quicker you obey, the smaller the price. The slower you hesitate, the sharper the consequences. It's a blunt arithmetic. Time multiplied by inaction equals destruction, while time multiplied by obedience equals survival. There is also an intimacy to obeying such orders, a violent kind of kinship with whatever force issued them. When you move instantly, you align yourself with a logic that isn't comfortable, that isn't pretty, that doesn't bend to popularity. You stop asking if it's fair and start doing what must be done. That alignment changes you. It rewires priorities, shifts loyalties. People will call it fanaticism or madness because they prefer the comfort of selective morality. Do when it's convenient. Ignore when it's costly. But true obedience demands you pay the toll immediately, and the toll is never small. Consequences pile like corpses when obedience is ignored. Not metaphorically. In the real currency of lives and ruins, hesitation costs more than bravery ever does. The history of collapse is littered with those who waited for consensus while the world burned. They comforted themselves with polls, with experts, with the illusion that time would make the decision easier. It never does. Time is a predator that eats preparedness. The order you could have followed yesterday becomes the disaster you now have to survive. The irony is poetic and merciless. Your delay becomes the story people whisper about in the rubble. And then there's the loneliness. When you obey where others hesitate, you stand apart and people will hate you for it. They will accuse you of arrogance, of seeking glory. They will call you reckless to justify their own cowardice. But the lonely position of the one who obeys is also sacred in its way. Because while the crowd debates, someone had to act, and the world was saved or damned by that single motion. The obedient are rarely thanked. Their reward is the faint relief of having done what had to be done, while everyone else wakes up to count the cost of their delay. So obedience becomes a moral test that reveals character in the rawest form. It is the clearest mirror of who you are when all the comfortable stories are stripped away. Will you step when the order demands it? Or will you let the moment pass because you prefer the safety of consensus and the illusion that someone else will fix your mistake? The choice is ugly and simple, and it spits in the face of all the polite philosophies people tuck under their pillows. There is no room for ceremony here, only for a hand that moves, a body that answers, a life that commits without waiting for applause. Understand this. The voice that commands immediate obedience isn't always merciful, but it is honest. It gives you no graceful exit, no staged alternative, no soft landing. It forces you to be real. And in a world full of rehearsed morality and staged virtue, that kind of reality is rare, terrifying, and necessary. If you hear it, you can ignore it and keep sleeping while the house collapses. Or you can answer and become the one who carries the burden that others could not. The cost is always there, but the cost of silence is infinite, and obedience, immediate, ugly, uncompromising, is the only purchase that sometimes saves. The door opens only for the one chosen to face it. It's a ridiculous image. People stand in front of doors their whole lives, knocking politely, polishing the brass, rehearsing the right words, waiting for someone else to hand them the key. They treat fate like a concierge. Tell me when to show up. But some doors don't swing for the crowd. They only unlatch for the person who smells like smoke and scars, the one whose hands are already calloused from carrying burdens no one else would touch. That's not luck. That's selection. The world doesn't call the comfortable. It calls the one who's already been tested and found unwilling to break. You can watch the masses circle the threshold like cattle, bargaining for permission. They form committees. They create rituals. They create excuses to delay the moment, when someone might actually have to act. Meanwhile, the chosen one stands near the frame, not because they're arrogant, but because they've been worn into readiness by circumstance. The door knows them. It senses the weight in their chest, the way their breath hardens when a choice is forced. The quiet promise tucked under their ribs that they will move even when everything else screams to stay. Doors have memory. Stone and wood remember the feet that pass through them, and some doors remember who bled to reach them. You don't become the one the door opens for by practicing speeches or polishing resumes. You become it by surviving scenes that would have convinced a lesser person to quit. You become it by taking on the things others refuse, the phone calls at midnight, the mess no one wants to clean, the truth that corrodes relationships if it's spoken aloud. The chosen one doesn't seek the door. The door sees the chosen one and opens, because it doesn't want the delay of democracy. It opens because whatever waits beyond needs quick hands, a steady gaze, a stomach for the ugly work. It opens because there's no time to argue about qualifications when the building is burning. People resent that. They always will. They'll paint the one who walks through as reckless or selfish, as someone who stole an opportunity meant for the patient and polite. But patience and politeness are for gardens, not for explosions. The chosen aren't thieves, they're tools picked up by necessity. It's messy and it doesn't come with applause. You don't get a medal for being the one who could do it. You get the job done, or you don't. And then the world judges you either way. The door doesn't care about their judgments. It only cares that the right hand reaches for the latch at the right time. There's also a loneliness to being chosen. The crowd watches through keyholes, gossiping about the one who answered the call, as if answering were a theatrical choice instead of a survival instinct. They whisper, they envy, they rationalize why they weren't called. Too busy, too tired, too noble to be so direct. But their excuses are just armor for fear. The truth is uglier. Most people aren't made for the moment the door demands. They crumble. They barter. They hope someone else with stronger shoulders will show up. And when that someone does, when they appear with mud on their boots and a stubborn look, the crowd is quick to rewrite the story so they can sleep without thinking about their own cowardice. The chosen one, meanwhile, knows the cost. They know that some doors close behind you and don't open again. They know what the frame takes with it when it swings relationships, illusions, small comforts. Sometimes pieces of your heart you never get back. You walk through with knowledge that the path beyond will not be kind. And still you step, because not stepping would be a different kind of death. The slow, quiet variety where regret becomes the real executioner. Which is worse? To live comfortably and be haunted by what might have been, or to walk through the door and find out you were made for the very thing everyone else denied. The chosen pick the latter every time, because they would rather be broken honest than whole and silent. And here's the sharp truth people pretend not to hear. The door doesn't open because you deserve it. It opens because something beyond needs you. Meritocracy is a pretty story. Necessity is the real judge. You might be ugly, angry, scarred, or ridiculous. None of that disqualifies you. In fact, it might be what qualifies you. The door looks for one thing, a willingness to do the hard, unromantic, often thankless task on the other side. It doesn't look for resumes. It looks for hands that won't tremble when the lever is heavy, for eyes that can hold the sight of ruin without blinking. When it finds that, it slides, it clicks, it opens. So don't stand polishing the brass, rehearsing how you'll look when you finally walk through. Stop waiting for permission that will never come unless you've already earned it in silence. The door opens for those who've been walking through their private hells and came out with a readiness that can't be taught. Be that person. Wear the scars without apology. Let the crowd gossip while you move. Because when the moment comes and the hinge screams, because it hasn't been used in a long time, the door will choose the one whose hands are already steady, the one who knows how to carry the aftermath, the one who can turn the lock without needing anyone's approval. And then it will open for you, and no one else would have lasted long enough to do what must be done. So step forward, take the key, and understand that some doors demand a particular kind of madness, one only the chosen can afford to embody. The sort that walks in with blood on its shoes and a calmness the crowd calls cruelty. Because they never learned to stand while everything burned around them, and you, who have learned, will do what no one else would. And the doorway waits because it always did, for that precise set of ruined, stubborn hands to finally reach for the latch and pull it wide enough to let the future out into the world, and then